Heath says, the children of Tracton read to learn before they go to school to learn to read. Children had access to various materials, such as brochures, different kinds of instructions, newspapers, and advertisements. In this sense, reading was almost always set within a context of immediate action. One needed to read a letter's address to prove to the mailman that one should be given the envelope. One must read the price of a bag of coal at Mr. Dogan's store to make the decision to purchase or not. Tracton children remembered and reassociated the contexts of print. For instance, children paid attention to a brand name, particular sets of numbers, or a particular logo, and then they placed where they first saw it, or where they called attention to how the occasion for this new appearance was not like the previous one. Heath states, the dependence on a strong sense of visual imagery often prevented efficient transfer of skills learned in one context to another. Heath cut out the names of well-known brands of products from Nabisco and Kellogg and placed them out of context, as well as repositioned the letters to test Tracton children's ability to read the names or whether they recognized the shapes of the boxes and the artwork on the boxes when they correctly identified the cereals. She developed a rewriting game with the children so they could know these items in new contexts and shapes. Heath continues, the graphic and everyday life context of writing were often critical to their interpretation of the meaning of print, for print to them was not isolated bits and pieces of lines and circles, but messages with varying internal structures, purposes, and uses. For most of these, oral communication surrounded the print. The written word was important for Tracton residents. Reading was a social activity. When something was read in Tracton, it almost always provoked narratives, jokes, sidetracking talk, and active negotiation of the meaning of written texts among the listeners. Heath says, authority in the written word did not rest in the words themselves, but in the meanings which were negotiated through the experiences of the group. There were 4 uses of writing and reading among Tracton residents. The first type was instrumental, which residents used to solve practical problems of daily life. Price tags, traffic signs, house numbers, bills, checks. A second type of reading and writing was social interactional, that gave information relevant to social relations and contacts with persons not in Tracton's primary group. For example, some wrote letters, many sent greeting cards, almost all read bumper stickers, newspaper obituaries and features, and church bulletins. The third type of reading and writing was associated with news-related materials. This included the local newspaper, political flyers, memos from the city offices, and circulars from the neighborhood center. A fourth type involved Tracton residents reading for confirmation, to seek support for beliefs or ideas they already held. This could have included reading the Bible or reading a brochure from a car dealer in regards to which car got better mileage than another. Heath claims the most frequent occasions for writing were those when Tracton family members said they could not trust their memory supportive, or they had to write to substitute for an oral message. For the written word in Tracton, which Heath termed literacy events, essentially brought the written word into a central focus in interactions and interpretations that contained their own set of rules of occurrence and appropriateness, just like talking junk, fussing, or performing a play song. There was a special case in the deviation away from the written word among Tracton residents in terms of reciting and singing hymns, prayers, and sermons. Individuals would include new words, which may be a phrase or a set of phrases from an earlier prayer, the hymn, or one of several formulaic phrases that might have raised a hymn. Also, the preacher might present a question or a phrase, which was taken up as a chant either by him or members of the congregation, and from that point on, the performance was joint, pastor and congregation. In Rhodeville, letter writing or note writing was something that took place in connection with holidays, family celebrations, and crises in personal lives, such as sickness and death. Individuals talked as though letters were parts of oral conversations, having used terms such as say, tell, and answer, just as they would in referring to talk. This conversational nature of the sequence of letters between two individuals formed a conversational chain. However, such conversational chains in writing were relatively rare in Rhodeville. Women in Rhodeville viewed letter writing as a one-to-one affair, which must remain balanced. Each letter from one party was an answer to a recent letter from the other party, and no one ever wrote two letters consecutively. As Rhodeville women grew older, they wrote letters less and less frequently, saying that they had no quiet time to themselves, and to write a letter when others were around would be considered rude. The greeting cards and thank you notes continued, however, for these were strongly tied to courtesy and good breeding. Since women wrote more letters and notes than men, the majority of all other types of writing in the community were disconnected texts, made up of isolated words, brief and often incomplete sentences, and short notations of explanation to accompany numerals. Children's writing in Rhodeville, largely encouraged by adults, involved writing thank you notes, teachers giving assignments, and coaches asking them to sign pledges of good behavior. Heath says, in Rhodeville, writing was an individual choice, not a group activity or even a group-sanctioned event. Writing was not that important among the shoulds of community members, and there was little interest in extending their writing habits or improving their children's, except insofar as writing related to specific school tasks. Beyond reading denominational magazines that came as a result of their church membership, Rhodeville residents read the local paper delivered every evening, as well as some families that read the regional paper each morning, and subscribed to magazines such as Better Homes and Gardens, McCall's, Popular Mechanics, People, and Time. Other popular magazines residents read included the National Enquirer and Family Circle that were sold at their grocery store or drugstore. Heath confides, two features stood out in the observation of reading habits in Rhodeville. Everyone talked about reading, but few people did it. And those who did read, few followed through on any action which might have been suggested in the reading material. The strongest proponents of the value of reading were young mothers in Rhodeville. In Rhodeville, bedtime stories were popular with mothers doing the bedtime reading. In terms of age range, preschoolers of Rhodeville participated vigorously in bedtime story reading. Rhodeville parents practiced reading with their children in their everyday life. For instance, parents practiced naming and describing things and objects their children came into contact with in their everyday lives. After their third birthday, listening became an important skill within the Rhodeville community. In this sense, listening passively was practiced at home and continued within the church. At Sunday school, this passive listen and learn and repeat period, which was usually established by the age of 4, children were given Bible story pictures to color, as well as were encouraged to draw other aspects they saw in their everyday lives. There were 3 overlapping stages of experiences with print before school. During the first stage, Rhodeville children were introduced to discrete bits and pieces of books, alphabet letters, simple shapes, basic colors, and commonly represented items in books for children. Most of the books parents gave their children contained illustrations in the form of 2-dimensional flatline drawings. Heath states, parents asked simple questions and expected their children to be predictable information givers, repeating the specific and discrete bits of information the adults had pre-formulated as the answer. The second stage involved children being able to recognize the power of print to instruct, inform, and entertain. At this stage, adults or older children performed for the benefit of young children. They read to them, and in return, the children sat passively and listened and learned in order to participate in follow-up questions. Rhodeville children at the third stage were given workbooks and encouraged to write their names, draw straight lines, color in the lines, follow the numbers and dots, and push out and paste shapes and letters. This practice reinforced repeatedly that the written word can be taken apart into smaller pieces and one item linked to another by following certain rules. During this stage, children gain manipulative experience in the linear sequential nature of books. Parents told them to follow simple rules. Stay in the lines, write answers on the lines, begin at the beginning, match the cutouts of letters and shapes to the corresponding diagrams. While the communities of Rhodeville and Tracton had their own oral and literate traditions, they also shared some things in common. They wrote only when it was necessary. Few wrote letters. They preferred direct face-to-face contact to transmit or obtain information. Reading was praised. They consciously collected reading materials for themselves and for their young children. They often talked about how they were going to learn how to do something by reading, but the steps of reading the materials and translating knowledge from the written word into action were often not taken. Children grew up surrounded by print. They praised and practiced reading with their young children. The written word held authority. The written word limited alternatives of expression. Women wrote few letters but sent greeting cards and used notes to jog their memory. Men wrote only for financial affairs. No one talked about reading as an activity unto itself. They read aloud to anyone who wanted to listen on the plaza, asked for interpretations of written materials by the group, and enjoyed the stories which invariably ensued from a report of something read. Individuals had no such accumulation of reading materials. Whatever came into the community was usually either read, then burned or used for other purposes, or immediately discarded. They had no books, and they found their reading in tasks which evolved for them in the house, the plaza, and at the neighborhood store. Words were action, and a creative oral rendering of a message could move an audience to action. The young had to learn to be and do, and if reading was necessary for this learning, that would come. The written word was for negotiation and manipulation, both serious and playful. The written word opened alternatives. In each community, they shared things such as asking certain kinds of questions, observing listening behaviors, how individuals and groups talked about reading and writing, had few occasions for reading or writing on the job, felt they should read and write more than they already did. Neither community's ways with the written word prepared it for the school's ways.